Welcome. I'm Donna Nelson, a professor of chemistry at the University of Oklahoma, and today we're gathered on the sound stage at Oklahoma City Community College to capture the biography of a biologist and biochemist, Elma Gonzalez, who was a former professor of biology at the University of California, Los Angeles, and is now professor emeritus from UCLA. Welcome, Elma. I'm so happy that you were able to come here today to tell us about yourself.
You're welcome.
And so I guess it's most appropriate to start at the beginning. So Elma, would you be able to tell us what it was that influenced you to become a scientist? What sparked your interest in science as a youngster?
That's a hard question. I think it always is because there's so many influences and so many things that happen along one's life. But I think the most dominant concept or idea that influenced me was that I like challenges, and I like to solve problems.
Yes.
And there was very rewarding to do science because you can figure things out and you get an answer.
Yeah, that's fun.
It's not like history where, problems go unanswered.
Absolutely.
And I just enjoyed all of the mathematical and science courses that I took in high school, well, beginning in middle school, I guess, and then high school. And I took as many of them as I could, although there was just never any certainty that I was going to go to college. It was primarily just my selfish interest in these things, and so I did it. And it was very good preparation.
Yeah. As a youngster, were there any family members that influenced your interest in science early on?
Well, I think I can say my father was the most influential because although he was a very poor person and his family were in very reduced circumstances, and I think he only went to school for 6 months.
Oh, wow.
But he had a keen intellect, and he had a lot of curiosity about the world. He liked to come home. He was a cowboy. We were on a ranch, and he would show up at the end of the day with a coyote or a, dead coyote on his rope, or quail's eggs, or stories about road runners that fought snakes, and all of these wonderful tales.
Wow.
And I think I loved that, and that must have been the start of my interest in science
and biology in particular.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't clear that I was going to be a biologist. I vacillated between chemistry, mathematics, biology, just back and forth. And I think the decision came at a moment of panic when I got to college and they asked me what my major was going to be. And I had to declare.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And even then, I told them I wanted to be a medical technician. And the lady who was, at those days they used to register us personally.
Yes.
The professors sat around the room with their little stack of cards and let you in their courses.
Yes. And
so this lady was the person who was sending you to different, counselors. And so she asked me what my major was, and I said medical technology. And she said, "Oh, what is that?" And I said, "Science." And she said, "Oh, well, Dr. Ludeman, who was a professor of chemistry, would know what to do with you."
Oh, boy.
And, TWU was always on the march for chemistry majors.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. Now, you went to Texas Women's University.
Yes, that's
what
correct.
You're talking. That's where you started out.
Right.
And so, I read that in your biography, and I found that very interesting because another person that we did the film of was Ann Nally,
right.
And she got her PhD at Texas Women's University. So I'm wondering, is there something special about Texas Women's University that sort of inspires leaders among women?
Again, I don't know. The reason I started thinking about TW was because of an English teacher I had who was a wonderful teacher, and we all loved her and worshipped her because she knew everything. And she had gone to TWU.
Uh-huh.
And she talked about the campus every once in a while, and I just focused on that. And I think I somehow knew that it was probably the most economical school in the state, and I knew I was going to have trouble getting away from home because I was a Hispanic female, and Hispanic parents are always interested in holding on to their daughters.
Keep your family intact.
Yes, especially their daughters. And so the idea that this was a women's college, I thought was going to be an important, hurdle that I could best, and
Yes.
and they would let me do that. And the other part was the finances because we had no money. So I just focused on that, and I thought, this is where I want to go. And I did take the entrance exam for the University of Texas, and I got a good score, but I had my mindset made up to go to TWU, so that's where I went.
Do you think that going to an all-women's university gave you more leadership opportunities, and perhaps that would influence you?
I believe so. I think when I arrived on campus, I had a tiny little scholarship from the what was it called, the Campus Government Association or something like that. And that kind of piqued my interest in sort of what do they do, and I started getting involved in different clubs and different activities, and yes, I mean, I think the playing field's a lot more even when you go to a women's college.
More opportunities.
More opportunities, yeah. I mean, I was president of Beta Beta Beta, for example. If this had been a co-ed school, you'd probably be a guy being a president of Beta Beta Beta.
What is that?
The Honor Society.
Honor
Society. The Biology Honor Society.
Oh.
Yeah. So things like that, I think, made a difference. Also, it's a small school, very few science majors, so you had a lot of access to professors. And it was a pretty good education. It was it was just the emergence of the molecular revolution, so we knew about Watson Creek, but just barely.
Yeah.
And we took classical courses in biology, which, some people might dismiss, but nevertheless are a very good foundation. You have to scramble later on. I had to scramble later on to catch up with molecular biology because I was kind of at that cusp. And but knowing the traditional field of biology was, I think, very, very useful.
Yes. Now, what was it that inspired you, that gave you the confidence to go on to graduate school? Because you went from there to Rutgers.
No, I actually went to work.
Oh, you went to work for a few years.
I worked for 3 years at the medical school in Dallas, at Southwestern Medical. And I was working in a rheumatology lab where they studied models of rheumatoid arthritis. And so I did a lot of hands-on. The approach then became, later on, it became the dogma that rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease, but at that point they really didn't know. So we were doing a lot of key experiments to elucidate the mechanism. And I loved the research. I mean, I knew that, I'll back up a little bit, because when I was a junior at TWU, I rebelled against going to the fields. We were migrant workers, and I just didn't want to go, and I wanted to stay and just have a job like a regular person, according to me.
So when you say fields, you mean working in the fields?
In the crops, yeah, picking crops. And so my dad said, yes, you can stay, but you have to have a job. And so I started looking for a job. Well, and this is kind of a cute story, so I'm going to tell it, and you can delete it later if you want.
No, wonderful.
But what happened was, the first place I thought to go looking for a job was a placement office on campus. So I went there and talked to the lady, and she said, oh, yeah, she said, we have a lot of people here hiring students for the summer. And she said, just, make sure you write down that you can, swim. And I said, but I don't swim. And she said, oh, well, it turns out that most of the people looking for students coming in for the summer were, camp counselors. And you teach the kids how to swim, right? So I was very discouraged, and she said, just write your name down, where we can get in touch, and maybe something will come up. Well, sure enough, there was one day, and I don't know what day of the week. It might have been a Friday. I don't remember, but I had to stay home from lab. I had a lab every day of the week.
Oh, wow.
Remember those days?
Yes. Yes.
And so for some reason, lab was canceled. And I went home and decided that was the best time to wash my hair. And at TWU, they wouldn't let you out of the dorm with rollers on your hair.
Oh, no. I remember.
So I was, trying to get my hair dried out. And, we didn't have hair dryers either. And at this point in time, all the little girls are going to say, "Oh, but she's ancient." And I am, but no, that's another story. Anyway, the phone rang, and it was a lady from the placement office,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And she said, "There's a man here from Baylor. He's looking for a summer student to work in a lab. Are you interested?"
Perfect.
And I said, "Yes."
Yeah.
So I pulled all the rollers out of my hair, the hair was still wet, and put on a dress, and I just rushed out there to meet the guy. And he had finished with all these interviews of graduate students, and he interviewed me and decided that he wanted to hire me. And so I was hired, and I said, "Okay, I'm going."
Great.
But I had no money, and I had to borrow money. Well, I hitchhiked to Houston. I borrowed money for the first month's rent, and then I starved the rest of the month until I got paid.
Where
But
there's a will, there's a way.
yeah, it was a great experience. I mean, I really learned about research. Mm-hmm. And the guy I worked with was a professor of pharmacology. Wanted me to start graduate school there, not go back to TWU. And I said, no, graduate school, what is that? I had never, considered that, didn't know about it. But he put the grain of interest in there. And so I went back to TWU and decided, okay, that was too good to be true. I'm just going to go ahead and finish my student teaching program that I had going. And I went to do my student teaching, and I hated it. So,
oh, no.
So back to what else can I do? And that's when I decided to look for a technician's job. And that's when I landed at UT Southwestern. Mm-hmm. And 3 years later, I made a decision that, the basic difference between myself and the postdocs in the lab is that they were educated and I didn't have the proper education. Mm-hmm. And that I wanted to be part of that world. And I started to look for graduate, opportunities, all over the country, actually, because I wanted to get out of Texas, too.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So that's when you went to Rutgers.
That's when I went to Rutgers, right.
And you got your PhD there.
Right. I decided that, for some reason, I decided that biochemistry was not that interesting because the people who did biochemistry, according to me, and then don't get offended, were people who studied one enzyme for the rest of their lives.
Oh, okay. I won't be offended. I'm not a biochemist
anyway.
So, but now you got your bachelor's degree in what year?
1965.
And then your PhD
in 1972.
72. Mm-hmm.
So I worked for 3 years, and then went to Rutgers and got my PhD in 4 years, mm-hmm. and then was done in 72.
That's pretty fast.
And then I didn't know what to do. I mean, I thought, the original plan was to come back to Texas and teach in a community college or something useful. And my professor said, "What? What are you going to do? Go back to Texas for?" So So she said, "You got a postdoc. Everybody postdocs." So I said, "Okay." And that's when I started looking for a postdoc position.
Yeah.
I applied for an NIH fellowship, and I got it. And so I ended up in Santa Cruz, at UC Santa Cruz.
Yeah, and that really is true. In biology, you really do need a postdoc.
Yeah, you do.
At least one.
These days, you need more than one.
Yeah. It's amazing how hard that requirement is. And so then, What was it that led you to UCLA? Because that's a pretty hard climb, going from
You're not kidding.
poor background all the way to UCLA. That's an amazing feat.
Well, and that's not the half of it. As a graduate student, I never took any plant-related courses.
Oh,
And most of my courses were biochemistry courses. And a little bit of microbiology, not much. And but I was interested in a novel question of how do the proteins know where they're going? So they're synthesized, they're made on the ribosomes and the cytosol. So how do they end up in the organelles? Do they have a zip code? How do they know? And nobody was addressing that question back then. Blobel had done his experiments, and they had found a signal sequence that kind of wasn't totally clear when I was looking at this, but it sounded very interesting. And so I knew that yeast, which is where I did my the organism I studied for my thesis, was not a good model for the kind of experiments that I had in mind. So I started looking around for a good model system. See, I was a good scientist from the beginning.
yes.
And so I looked at the work that Christian Deduve was doing at Rockefeller. And I even got an interview with him, and it's totally awesome place. And I also was interested in Harry Beavers, because now Deduve was working on lysosomes of rats, and Harry was working on glycosomes of plant seeds. And I knew nothing about plants, but I knew about cells. So I had chutzpah in the extreme. I mean, I just thought
that's what it takes a lot of times. Yeah.
So I wrote him a letter, and I said, I want to work with you, and here's what I want to do. And I said, I think I'm going to get a fellowship, or at least I've applied for one. And he said, come on down. And I did take a flight, spring break flight, to go check it out. And it was one of these spring break, students hire charter a plane, and everybody goes playing. And this particular time they wanted to go to San Francisco. So I got on that flight and went to talk to Harry. And we hit it off, and he thought, hey, this is going to work, and so on. So then I had to wait it out for my fellowship, and that was a long wait, and finally came through. And so I drove myself to California for that. But it was a question that I selected first, and the organism came along with it. And that was difficult, because I knew really nothing about plant physiology or about plants. And the guys in the lab used to laugh at me. There were 6 postdocs in that lab, and me. And I was sort of their cell biology specialist.
Yeah.
And they all knew plant physiology, so they all laughed at me. I said, okay, fine,
Yeah, but you must have learned a lot from
I
them.
did, and they were very generous. They offered me, including, getting back to your question, the advice that when I went to interview at UCLA, and they offered the job, they all jumped up and down and said, take it, there are no jobs out there. You got to take that one.
Yes.
And it was the first interview that I had.
That's amazing. That's terrific.
And then I got it to UCLA, and I was totally unfinished, just totally. I mean, in all, I had 18 years formal education. So it was just not enough to get everything in there that I needed to have. But I was a quick learner, I guess, and had a certain amount of persistence, and
that can
thick
go a long
skin.
way. Yeah. And so what was life like at UCLA back then? I mean, there must not have been, or were there many women professors?
There weren't, and in fact, the year that I was hired was a year that they had been put under pressure to hire women. And so there were several of us that came in at once. There had been only two. There was a woman botanist who had long been gone when I arrived, and then Mildred Mathias, who was just retiring when I arrived. She'd also been a famous botanist. and then there was Claire Zago in animal physiology. And she was really the only one in the life science departments. Maybe Sherry Morrison was in micro, I'm not sure. So there weren't many, 2 or 3 at the most.
Wow.
And then they hired 5 of us.
Uh-huh.
And so it wasn't as daunting, I guess, because we were all commiserating with each other. We're going through the tenure grind, which was merciless.
Yes.
And it was just good to have the company. You know, it's good to get that camaraderie,
Right.
that panic.
A cohort of you
fosters.
going through together.
Yeah, right. And so, and it was, my attitude always was, I don't need applause, just don't get in my way.
Yes, that's a terrific attitude. It really is. It's that way a lot of times.
Yeah. And so that was mainly it. And when people started putting some resistance, I either went around them or I tried humor and I tried to get them to, to not be so resistant. I mean, just to give you an example, when I arrived, there was this whole cascade of moves that were projected, and that was going to clear up space for me to have a lab. And it just wasn't happening. I wasn't getting the lab that I needed, and
Right.
and I knew I had been mentored sufficiently by somebody that the clock starts ticking.
Right.
And in 7 years or 6 years, really, you have to come up with sufficient progress for tenure. And I was getting a little bit distraught because here was 6 months in and I still didn't have a lab.
Wow.
So I went into the department chair, who was kind of an easygoing guy, and I said, he said, well, how can I help you? I said, well, I really need an account for my wardrobe. And he said, what? And I said, well, if you hired me to look pretty and not work, you have to pay for my wardrobe. I'm not doing anything. You gave me a year off from teaching.
Oh, wow.
And no lab.
No lab.
I
So there was nothing to do.
very frustrated, very frustrated. And so he kind of got it, and he started, said, okay, well, there's this temporary space that we can empty out for you, and this and that. And it was helpful because one of the things that I knew was that I had to put an equipment kit together, and there were opportunities for people to give me things, but I had no place to put them.
Right. And it's hard to attract any students if you have no place for them to work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and, okay, so I could start writing grant proposals, but at that point, I wasn't I wasn't sufficiently aware of how long it took to get a good grant proposal application in. And so I really didn't start when I should have started. I started the year after to get my first grant application in, which was a big mistake. I mean, I should have started before I got hired, but I mean, I was supposed to have for 22 months.
Yes. Yeah, that's very short for biology.
Absolutely, yeah. It was just those guys insisting that I take that job because there were no jobs out there.
That's probably good advice, though. Really, that's a wonderful job.
Yeah, no, I grew into it. I learned a lot, and it became my home.
Yeah, and obviously you got tenure.
Oh yeah,
And then promotion.
promotion,
Full professor.
Yeah.
And then sort of a national role model as it became more and more important. The number of Hispanics in the United States increased. And so there's a need for Hispanic role models and mentors. And so you've become nationally very important.
Well, it started fairly early. I think it was 1978 or so. I started being asked to do site visits be part of site visit teams for the MBRS program. And
the MBRS program is?
Minority Biomedical Research Support Program, which I think is now another name, but back then it was, that's what it was called.
And that's in NIH?
Yes, that's at the NIH, and I believe it was at the NIGMS, National Institutes of General Medical Sciences, but not all of the programs were in that particular unit.
Right.
I started, after a little while of site visits, I was invited to be on the review committee. So I spent 5 years, I think it was, on that review committee. And that meant that I also was chairing site visit teams throughout the country and Puerto Rico. And you learn a lot when you have to look in other people's closets, believe me. It's,
Yes.
you know, how what works, what doesn't work, what's missing, what's important. And so by 1990, when the Stokes Alliance came on, the legislation came on board, I saw the opportunity to start something at UCLA, because up to that point, UCLA had no minority presence to speak of. And
you mean even among the students?
even among students, right? The numbers were pretty low, and overall, the number of students of color, as they say, getting fellowships, national fellowships, was just nothing. I mean, I used to also read fellowships for the NRC and the Ford and the NSF, and there was just nobody that you recognize as a native Mexican American or even Puerto Rican coming through, or Native American. I mean, for that matter, there was very, very few.
So they were almost all white.
They were all white, or newly, people who were born elsewhere, but usually European or Asian. And so sort of the confluence of things came together in 1990. The Stokes Alliance kind of influenced some professors in the UC to form a consortium and make a big application for one of these multi-campus grants. And so I became the regional director for UCLA.
Oh.
And I went to the dean and I said, this is our chance. We need a unit that becomes the center that administers. And from this center, we can go after other federal funds that are available for these kinds of enrichment efforts. And he said, okay. That was all. Deans are good for making centers.
Yes.
I said, that's right, especially since we're not asking for any money. So we nucleated that center, and so the Stokes Alliance came first, and then the Bridges program, I think, was another one, and then the
Bridges to the Doctorate.
Yeah, Bridges to the
NSF
Doctorate.
program.
Yeah, and then eventually I applied for the MARC program, and I became MARC program director. So that was the last 10, 15 years. Well, for 15 years we've had that grant, but I only was hands-on director for the last 10 years before I retired. And we concentrated on sending minority students, Native American, Hispanic, Mexican American, and
African American.
African American to elite programs.
Good.
Because we know that there is a pedigree.
Yes.
Yes. Issue here as well. You've provided the data, so you should know.
Yes.
And that if these kids from UCLA don't get hired, who's going to get hired?
Right.
So I'm very proud of that a lot of our students have gone on to the Ivy League. I just got word yesterday. Last night, of one of my former students who got an MD PhD at Columbia, and she's going to be an academic medicine professional. And then we've had 5 at Harvard, 3 at Yale. We have 6 at Stanford.
That's wonderful.
And they're all coming, and they're graduating on time.
It's terrific.
And they're doing what everybody else does when they finish. They go to postdocs.
Yes. And this is in biology. So.
Well, no. The thing about these programs that was a key thing was that they were independent of department. Because of the rarity of these students, we felt that it was important to provide an active mass, that could support each other and help each other and inspire each other. So we made sure that we treat them as if they were one cohort. So it was chemistry students. There are 8 or 9 degree programs in life sciences, in the sciences at UCLA, that were eligible for these kind of. And so over time we've had them all. Chemists, biochemists, As long as they have some potential for biomedical research, they were in. Even a mathematician or two.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really terrific.
So, yeah.
So now you've been very active in an organization called the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science, and I think you served as a board member for a number of years.
Just recently, that was actually. Well, I'm sort of a founder because I was there at the beginning, although I was kind of like not aware of what was going on.
And when was that, the beginning that you're talking about?
1976 or 7, something like that. 77. Well, when I first started, it was 76. When I went to the first national meeting, and I think maybe that was the first national meeting. There had been little meetings before that, but just the guys getting together, and there weren't that many women.
Right. And so that's really facilitated you being a mentor for other minority students.
Well, this has all come in a very slow. The other thing that influenced me was that double blind study, that AAAS, because I was one of the participants of that. Yeah. So, and what was really shocking was they had invited, I think it was 26 women to this thing, and they had asked 5 Native Americans supposedly. They had chemists, they had dentists, and anybody they could find that had a degree to make that 5. They had invited 5 Hispanic, and they couldn't find 5 Hispanic women with a PhD in the sciences. And they had, 10 African Americans and 10 Puerto Ricans or something like that.
Okay. So when you say double bind, you mean people who belong to 2 different underrepresented groups.
That's right.
One they're a female and another they're underrepresented minority.
In the sciences, right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what came from that?
A report. And it was disseminated, and I'm not sure. There was a recent effort to come to grips with the legacy of that, and I'm not sure that they concluded very much. I mean, because there's still issues, there's still problems.
Right. But participating in that influenced you somehow.
Yes, it influenced me personally because I was annoyed that they had only found that we were only 3, I think, at that meeting with a PhD. And we went to the AAAS who had organized the meeting, and I said, well, why did you? They said, well, we couldn't find any more. There's nobody else.
Wow.
And that was a shock because
that is shocking.
I always assumed that there would be other women like myself somewhere else in the country, and I just, hadn't run into them.
Right.
But this came, really bluntly that there weren't anymore. So I was the 3rd PhD granted to a Mexican-American woman in this country.
Right.
And, that was like, now there's 40 million people of Mexican origin, and we're still maybe 150 women with a PhD. I mean, it's still a pretty dire underrepresentation.
Right. And before my study, minorities have told me, just as you said, that they would go to professional meetings and look around and not see another person from a minority group, and that they thought they just weren't coming, but they were out there.
Right.
And then when I did that study, it showed that indeed the numbers are so tiny.
And I think I should be interviewing you about that because, nobody had been sufficiently clued in to ask the question, quantitatively.
Right.
What is out there and why aren't they, present?
Yeah. But this is one of the reasons why mentors and role models are so important, and one of the reasons why you're important, because you're a national mentor and role model, for the students, and will help bring the students along.
Yeah.
And
well, that's why I joined Facebook, so I could continue, because I do. There's still issues, even just through the oral stage. There's so many things that beset them that they can change their mind.
Right.
And they can decide to do other things.
Yeah, and even later on, at the beginning of their faculty appointment, they can decide to drop out. So I guess that brings us to, is there any particular message or any advice that you would give to young people who want to follow the pathway that you've established, follow in your footsteps, and who are trying to use you as a role model?
Well, I think the first thing is the nature of the academic world is it's a good life and it's worth doing. But we tend to scare people off because we always complain about things. We're very good at it, complaining about this and that. Yeah. So the students hear us and they say, "Oh well, I don't. There's too much politics in science." And I said, well, either we're the world's biggest masochists or we're the world's biggest liars because, we're here, and some of us have been here for all of our professional lives. So there must be something good about this.
Yeah, there's politics in everything.
Yeah, there's politics in everything. So one is don't believe what you hear, just listen and pay attention to details and how people live their lives. And there's a whole variety of people. They don't all have to work in the lab 30 hours a week. 30 hours a day or 24 hours a day. And, it's not written down anywhere that you should live life like that. So if you want to have a hobby, have a hobby. If you want to have a family, tuck it in there, and enjoy a full life. So it's not as if you're becoming a monk, or So don't look at it like that. It's a good life. The other thing that I think I would pass on is that you don't have to do it all at once. Some students say, "Well, I want to go." One really great student who's now at Stanford said to me, "Well, I'm interested in getting into the National Academy, but I also want to be a MARC director." And I said, "Well, you can't do both. So get one and then go for the other if that's what you want to do."
It doesn't have to be simultaneous.
It doesn't have to be simultaneously. There are different phases of your career, too. There are phases when you're totally absorbed in doing the research and the experiments, and that fulfills you, and that's, everything that you need. But at some point, you begin to get more philosophical about things, and you begin to look at the world at large and the problems society has, and you want to be more part of that. It's not I'm not saying that the research isn't part of that, but it is just one aspect of your contribution. And so, that I think that's an important thing that doesn't get told very often, is you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it at different stages of your life, and I think that's a good one. And the other is that you build friendships. You look for mentoring in different. Well, it's one time I told my students, said, "Look, there's so few of people like me that if every student wanted a mentor that looked like them, they would be going without."
Right.
So you find mentors for aspects and needs where you can find them.
Yes. But everything doesn't have to be in one person.
In one person, exactly. Just exactly my point. I've had good mentors when I've been interested in learning about music, for example, and symphonies and things like that. And I've had mentors in my professional career, and I've had, it's just different people that have that knowledge and that experience that are nice people, and you can get along with them.
Well, that sounds like very good advice. So is there anything else that you want to add? Anything that I've forgotten to ask about?
Well, no, I think it's I guess the one thing I want to emphasize is that it's being an academic is essentially an entrepreneurial activity.
Yes.
One of the little stories that I tell people is that kind of relates to this is when I was a young woman, I would go visit my family and not be able to stay more than 4 or 5 days at a time, so that's per year. My father was very, upset about that, and he said, "Well, what kind of place do you work for that doesn't give you a vacation?" And so I didn't want to say, well, they don't give me a vacation, because that wasn't really true.
Yes.
So I said, well, it's like owning your own business, Dad. You have to be there to make it move.
Yeah, it is.
And he said, oh, he understood that. And it is just like owning your own business. But it is also like owning your own business in that it gives you an opportunity to make decisions about what you're interested in and what you really want to do.
Right. A lot of autonomy.
A lot of autonomy. What course you're going to teach, how often. As long as you're teaching, they're happy. What research you're going to do, where you're going to apply for research funding, what journals you're going to publish in, whether you choose to meet the media or not, if
Right.
you're in that, an opportunity like that comes along. So you do have a lot of autonomy. And you can't really say that about a lot of professions.
That's true.
So I think that's a plus.
It is. I agree with you.
And we need to promote that.
That's true. It makes us able to do things like this today.
Right, exactly.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much for
pleasure.
coming and doing this today. It's been delightful chatting with you. So, thank you.